Welcome to the second part of software validation. After you've set up the SOP with all the instructions, what's left is now to actually do the validation. And that means to fill out this form that you can see in the back already for every single quality relevant software on your list. As always, let's try to keep this practical and not look at our template for too long, but instead we'll look at an example of how this could be filled out. Let's say we're evaluating formwork from the standpoint of open regulatory as a medical device manufacturer. And that's actually not too far off, because we're using formwork too, also for our own documentation. We start by documenting general information about the software. That's our first box here. The QMS ID is simply the number that you assigned the software in your software list. So you number your items from 1 to infinity, I guess. The version number for formwork you can find at the bottom of every page. You can find it here. So in this case, we're at version 1.51.0 at the point we're recording this video. And in this case, I then simply copy-pasted the URL as a location. Some bit of useful information might be to mention the SOPs, as you can see here. So for the purpose of formwork, that's the document and record control SOP. Next, we describe the intended use and use context. For us, formwork is a self-developed tool, but most importantly, we use it just like you to store and manage our QMS documentation. And that implies, of course, for us as well, it's quite important that this information can always be accessed and doesn't get lost. Next, we assess quality relevance. The list of criteria here probably speaks for itself. Yes, formwork is used in the document and record control process. Yes, the conformity of medical devices would be affected, for example, if all the files get lost or become unavailable. There's no risk for third parties involved in using formwork. So that's a no here. Yes, the software is used to manage QMS and TechDoc files. And yes, you can sign and release the files within formwork. As always, if any of these simple yes or no answers might be a bit controversial in an individual case and might raise questions, then take a little extra time to also provide a short description and justify your response. Next, moving on to the general assessment, you will find some weird GAMP categories here. GAMP stands for Good Automated Manufacturing Practice, and that's something some international technical committee came up with in the attempt to provide industry guidance. Why is that relevant? Because it apparently gives you some guidance on how often you should review your software validation. Your GAMP category and a brief risk assessment should determine the software criticality in section 4.3. So how to fill this out? Again, a typical risk to consider is, for example, data loss or data availability during server downtime. In our case at Open Regulatory, formwork is a self-developed software. So we mark GAMP category 5 here. And as a regular user of formwork, you can select GAMP category 3 for non-configurable software. You can then have a look at the annex in section 10 to understand better what that means for your criticality classification. So 5 always leads to high software criticality, for example. The validation plan and the next step is something we can keep rather short and simple. We enter the participant. Typically that's only one lucky person, like the QMO, and some information about the test environment. Your testing procedure is simply running typical use cases or use scenarios. The validation report is now where the actual work happens. First off, think of what those typical use scenarios are. In the case of formwork, I just went through the document and record control SOP, and I noted down every activity that is carried out in formwork, as you can see with the steps here, step 4, 5, 6, and then 2 additional ones. And I formulated corresponding test cases for it. In a most minimalistic way, that is creating drafts, conducting reviews and releases, then applying editing documents and applying changes, and archiving files as a brief overview. You should then also think of technical requirements, like in this one example here, besides the pure user interface activities, like the test case to actually access the framework website. Then each of these test cases should be formulated in a way that you can document objective evidence of a successful test completion. For example, a release document is automatically labeled as such and displayed as such in framework. Further below in section 7, or paragraph 7, you can then add screenshots as a proof that each of these manual tests has been carried out successfully. Screenshots or videos are somewhat a best practice in the industry, so auditors might ask you for it. However, we discussed this a little bit in our team, and reading the norm, we couldn't find any explicit requirement to do it. So after all, I would say that section 7 is rather optional for you to fill out, and totally up to you if you want to make your auditors happy in that way. One piece of good news at the end. If you have a Formwork subscription and plan to carry out this validation, then let us know and write us an email. We can always provide you with a current report for the most recent version of Formwork, filled out to the extent possible for us, so including predefined test cases that I've just shown you, and screenshots also, except for the information that you obviously need to customize yourself, like the test participants and the release information. We hope that makes your regulatory pain a little bit easier, at least when using our software. Besides that, good luck with your software validation.